Good afternoon.
Good afternoon.
Isn't it great to be here today? I want to ask how many of you are here at Tell Me a Story for the first time. Anybody here for the first time? Good. Well, welcome to you. And how many of you have been here lots of times? Yay! And how many of you have told a story? See, that's great. I'm so glad. Our numbers are increasing. Well, we have 4 delightful women telling delightful stories today. We have Jean Lunsford, Becky Leager, Kathy Bajer, and Libby Woods in that order. So Jean is going to come first. Jean lives here with her husband, Phil, and they moved here in September 2007, and they live in South Village. So Jean, you're up.
I have a story. Can everybody hear me? Is this all right? Good. Thank you. In April 1976, we flew to Milan. We had purchased Eurail passes in the United States for our month in Italy. Upon landing, we took a bus to the train station and boarded the train going east to Padua. Or is it west? West to Padua, our first stop. There were only a few passengers in the first class car. As we were approaching Lake Garda, an elegantly dressed Italian lady appeared. Her name was Paola Maloney. She practiced law in Milan, owned a primary residence there, a 4-bedroom and 4-bath flat in Paris, and also a villa outside of Verona. She asked, "Have you ever been to Lake Garda?" Phil replied, "My wife has not, but I was here during World War II. My division took Verona from the Germans. My first bath in 2 months was in Lake Garda. My unit was chasing Mussolini, but when we reached him, the Italian partisans had already captured and hung him." Then Phil told her about entering the army after graduating from high school, joining the 10th Mountain Division, landing in Naples, and walking from just north of Florence into the Brenner Pass, to south of the Austrian border, where for him the war ended. Our itinerary was to attend a 2-week elder hostel in Padua, Venice, spend a few days in Florence, and another 2 weeks elder hostel in Verona, and then tour Milan. When Paola found out that when we would be in Verona, she realized she would be there at the same time. And she commented, "I would like for you to see my 16th century villa just outside of Verona. There is to be a conference of international college professors of literature, and I am entertaining them the evening of May 2nd, and I would like for you to attend." And my first thought was, I don't have the appropriate dress. She said, "You did bring one skirt, didn't you? Wear it, and the other guests will understand that you are dressed as an American tourist." So I wore my jean skirt and my navy blazer. She said, "Come in a taxi. Just tell the taxi driver you wish to go to Coventry." After we arrived in Verona, we received another phone call to finalize our plans, and our adventure began. Michael Campo, our leader, was a first-generation American living in New England, and he spoke fluent Italian. He suggested flowers as a hostess gift, found us a taxi driver who spoke a little English, and arranged for us to be taken to Coventry. The taxi driver then commented, "Ah, big house." After a 20-minute drive, we arrived. and it was a big house. We made sure we were in the right place before we let the taxi driver leave us. And then I quickly took a photo of the big house, and at the far end of the table are the few photos I took at Coventry. After we arrived, a few minutes before the group, Paola showed us the villa's first floor. Her family had acquired and restored the villa in the 1800s, at which time the ceiling had been whitewashed and lowered after the Black Plague. You could still see remnants of the painted ceiling. In the basement was a big indoor swimming pool, formerly a granary. The 45 international guests arrived in a bus and the evening began. We were taken care of by Maurizio, a young Italian who was about 30, just finishing his PhD in English literature in England, and he spoke very good English. His wife was a college professor from the University of Bologna, and that is the group from the University of Bologna that we ate dinner with. Lemonade and wine punch and hors d'oeuvres were served in the dining room. And you can see in another photo frescoes on the walls and painted ceilings. We circulated with Maurizio always at our side, seeing that we met English-speaking guests. Buffet dinner was served about 9:30 with round tables of 6 or 8. The tables were set with linen, crystal, and china. A pitcher of ice water and a bottle of wine on each table. On the large buffet tables were 4 kinds of ravioli pasta, potatoes, polenta, spinach souffle, cooked carrots which were spiced and seasoned. Another table of cold things had olives, shredded carrots, hard-boiled eggs, and finally a table of desserts, cakes, tarts, and candies. While we were eating, another young Italian in his 30s appeared. He was Count Arviado Ardivirdi, and he invited us to see his 17th century villa the next day. He would pick us up at our hotel after he had a short business meeting in Verona. Toward the end of the evening, we began thinking about calling a taxi to take us home. But another Count della Divira, presented his card to us and offered to drive us back to our hotel. This second Count spoke very good English, was in his 20s, and his top hobby was Jules Verne. He had just purchased many articles from the Jules Verne estate, which includes memorabilia, first editions, and even unpublished editions. This fall, he planned to attend the International Jules Verne Association in the United States. It had about 300 members from all over the world. The next year, he planned to host them in his estate in Italy. He owned 2 villas, but explained to us that he would not invite them to his primary residence because of chance of theft. We were in bed a little after 1, dazed and exhausted. Friday at 9:30, we were dressed again and off to see another villa, which was even larger and more elegant than Paola's. We met his wife, 4-year-old daughter, and his mother, and then had a quick tour. His property also included a winery. The villa and his title were inherited through his father. His mother's family had owned the winery. He was starting a business of holding conventions, seminars with both large and small groups. I'm sure he thought we were rich Americans and he was trying to drum up business. His family winery was Bertani, which we have seen sold in the United States. We were given promotional brochures with pictures of the former gardens and the elegant rooms with impressive descriptions. The brochures and photos that I took are on the far end of this table. Their wine supply contained vintages from the 1920s. As the Germans approached in World War II, they closed the opening with brick so it looked like the wall had always been there. And this did fool the Germans. Back in Verona, we joined our group at the hotel in time for lunch, thinking, was the last 24 hours real or a dream?
Awesome. Thank you. Okay, next we have Miss Becky Leager. And you might remember that last year at this time we were all madly making origami to decorate Springmore, and this lady made all that possible. But today she has for you an amazing story. Becky lives in South Village, and she's been there how long, Becky?
15 years.
15 years in South Village, yeah. So be thinking as these people are talking, what's the story you're going to tell when you get up here? Come on, Miss Becky.
Now this,
Yeah, that's it. Just aim right at it there.
all right. It may be a disappointment to you because it's not actually, I wasn't in the middle of a great earthquake. I was just on the edges. It's about my experience in the great Tokyo-Yokohama earthquake of 1923 when I was 4 years old. My parents were missionaries in Japan, and we were accustomed to small tremors daily caused by an active volcano nearby. I recall waking up to hearing the lid on the chamber pot rattled for a few seconds when the tremors occurred. But on September 1, 1923, in Karizawa, a resort town 90 miles from Tokyo, we experienced a stronger tremor, causing us to rush outside. I can remember seeing my mother carrying my baby sister being thrown from side to side as she came down the stairs. We gathered in the yard, and I remember the trees swaying, the earth shaking, and making waves across the yard as though the earth was liquefied. When the shock subsided, all felt normal except for several aftershocks, which came throughout the day. A few dishes had fallen from the shelves and lay broken on the floor. We had an appointment for a picture taking and were posed, dressed in our Sunday best, for the shoot. when a tremor came and we had to be snatched up and taken outside again. By then, we were beginning to get some word of the magnitude of the 8.3 quake in Yokohama region. One man in our town was killed. Now this is in our town, was killed when a building collapsed on him. And the telegraph operator was extremely annoyed that his report of our disaster was not acknowledged in Tokyo. He was unaware that the receiving office in Tokyo was in flames. In Yokohama, the whole city was destroyed. It being noon, every hibachi was cooking the noontime meal, and they were all overturned and set immediate fires. The water mains burst, so there was no water pressure, paralyzing the fire departments. According to police records, fire broke out in 83 locations in 15 minutes. The next 15 minutes, fires were reported in 130 places. This was in Tokyo. People fled to the Sumida River, crowding on bridges until they collapsed. If you can recall, in 1923, most of the bridges across rivers were these curved things without much support. Well, they all collapsed following this, and all the people were dumped in the river. In Ueno Park, where many took refuge, there were eventually 34,000 people. Then, about 4 o'clock, a 300-foot-high fire tornado formed, which sucked the oxygen out of the air, killing all but 300 of the 44,000 people. A 40-foot-high wall of water, this was from a tsunami, washed out to sea many of the thousands who were on the beaches. The first shock occurred at 11:58 a.m. A 60-mile segment of the Philippine tectonic plate had ruptured and thrown itself against the Eurasian tectonic plate, about 60 miles beneath Sagami Bay. Although the shock waves weakened somewhat by the time they reached Tokyo, you can see the damage was terrific. Now, back in Karizawa, where I was, the trains pouring through with people on top and hanging off the sides kept the population busy. They divided into shifts to meet the trains with rice balls and water for the famished passengers. My father had the 5 a.m. to 8 a.m. shift. The trip on our line had 26 tunnels. Imagine riding on top of a train through 26 tunnels. Well, we left Karizawa soon after that to sail on the Abraham Lincoln to go on furlough. My parents tried their best to keep us kids from seeing the bodies in the water of the harbor 15 days after the earthquake. One amusing incident, to wrap up the tale of destruction. There was an English woman in her bathtub on the second floor of a hotel when the earthquake struck. The building collapsed, but her bathtub stayed up in the air, supported by 2 pipes. The pipes remained perpendicular for a few seconds. Then they slowly sagged sideways and deposited her in her bathtub in the street. A kindly Japanese man removed his kimono and gave it to the shivering lady.
We thank you, Miss Becky. Aren't these great stories? Great. Life is so interesting, isn't it? Kathy Bajer lives with her husband George in house number 37. They've been here since July of 2006, originally from Hungary by way of Florida for sure, and one other place, and she's going to tell us about that today. You're going to tell us about a different place you lived in today. Okay, come on.
Hello. The title of my story is My Failed Carjacking. Can you hear?
Pull it up just a little bit. Up higher. Raise it.
Now? How about now? Should I start over? Okay. So the story, the title of the story is My Failed Carjacking. And it goes like that. In 1978, my husband George and I were working at different departments of the University of Illinois in Champaign-Urbana. We had only one car. It was a maroon Pacer, AMC Pacer. It was a unique car. It wouldn't be so different now, but at that time it was a unique car, and it was well ahead of its time. It had a short life of 6 model years and a production total of only 280,000 units. You wouldn't see too many of them on the road. We rented an apartment on campus. My job, my part-time job, was in walking distance, and our routine was that George took the car in the morning and he usually picked me up after work. On that beautiful autumn day, I saw the Pacer right across from the building when I stepped out. I didn't look right, I didn't look left, I just trotted straight ahead, and I didn't even look at the man in the car. I plopped down on the passenger seat and started talking in rapid-fire Hungarian, telling him about the stories and events of my day. It sounded something like that. Képzeld, ezek már megint egész idő alatt bömböltették a rádiót, és én már nem szóval. It took me about a minute to realize that there was no response. The car wasn't moving either. Actually, the silence was so thick I could cut it with a knife. I looked over to the driver's side and saw a complete stranger staring back. His face showed a mixture of shock and fear. Suddenly, the seat under me became red hot. I jumped out of the car as fast as I could, mumbling something like, "I'm sorry." 2 spaces behind this car, there was an identical pacer parked. The driver looked somewhat familiar, but I wasn't 100% sure because I have never seen George laughing so hard.
Our fourth and final storyteller today is Libby Woods. This is show and tell day. Kathy brought her picture and Jean brought hers, and Libby has some show and tell for us as well. Libby and her husband Alan moved here just a little over a year ago, August of 2012. Alan's told stories twice, and Libby has a wonderful story for us today. Come, Libby.
I will. Need to get this. Can you hear me? Am I all right? No? Down lower? Is that better? Better? Down a little bit more?
Let me do one more thing. Hold on just a second. You might be able to push it forward to you just a little bit. There, that might work.
Now, does that work better? Okay. I'm going to talk to you today about my grandmother's face. My grandmother's name was Elizabeth Lizzie, they called her Lizzie, Bear Miller, a grand old gal. She was very much the matriarch of the Miller clan when she died at the age of 97. Since I was the last of the 25 grandchildren, this is how I remember her, as an older woman. I got the right way. But first let me tell you a little bit about my grandfather. And this is my grandfather, so you have a little bit of visual of what he is. John Ernest Miller came from Germany when his family was with his family when he was only 25 years old to settle in Pittsburgh, PA. When his family became destitute after being here for 5 years, he was bound to 2 years of service at a glass factory when he was only 10 years old. It is my understanding when someone is bound into servitude of this sort that some or all of their earnings will go towards paying the family debts. After his 2 years of service were over, the whole family moved over to Steubenville, Ohio. Once he got there, he also found work in a glass factory. At the age of in 1961, at the age of 17, he joined the 4th Ohio Volunteer Infantry, serving 4 years in the Civil War. He returned to Steubenville after the war to work again at the same glass factory, and he was put in charge of the mold shop. He met Lizzie, and he boasted that he had found the prettiest girl in Steubenville, Ohio. She was 7 years his junior, but they met somehow, and they were married in 1867. They moved to Pittsburgh in 1872 when he went to work for George Duncan and Sons Glass Factory as head of the mold shop again. The mold are made by first making a sketch of what you're going to put into this glass mold. Then you're going to cut it out of wood. And after you cut it out of wood, you fill it with plaster of Paris and to make a mold. And then after that, it goes into a heavy lead mold so that the hot glass could be poured into it. A family story. One evening, my grandmother was sitting near a lamp doing some handwork, and my grandfather was looking at her. He picked up his pad and pencil and began sketching her. He was thinking of a new mold. 3 years later, in 1876, there was a centennial in the Exposition Hall in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania, where J.E. Miller entered some of his glassware designs, and one of them was the three-face glassware pattern. He decided he would take Lizzie down to this exposition, and she was walking back down through the exposition to where the glassware was, and she was mumbling, and she says, "No one's going to see it way back here." And he turned to her and said, "Lizzie, it doesn't matter. It took first place." And this is what he had designed. And you can come up and look at it if you'd like. There's three faces going around the outside edge. An article in a three-face pattern written by W.L. Crawford, and I quote, "Andrew Carnegie, another man hanging around Pittsburgh in those days, once said, 'The only smart thing I know to do is to hire the right people to do the right job.'" Still quoting, "Well, there must be something in the Pittsburgh air, because promptly upon the formation of his own company, George Duncan hired a 33-year-old man who already had 22 years of experience in the glass trade. He rose through 5 different firms while learning and doing all phases involved in making glass. He completed 7 years as a mold maker, so he took the next step with Duncan as a designer. This man was John Ernest Miller, who would spend 52 years making Duncan glass in Pittsburgh and the factory until the factory was destroyed by fire. That's the end of the quote. The company moved to Washington, PA, where my grandfather became a partner, and the company name became the Duncan and Miller Glass Company. John Ernest Miller had many patents registered in his name. He was for designs of glassware, tool making, etching in glass, engraving machines, and many other things over the years in his profession, I guess I should say. When he was honored at a factory picnic in 1925 for giving 77 years of service, he was called the Dean of the Glass Industry. The workers presented him with a glass cane. His response, "Gentlemen, thank you very much. When I get old, I shall be very proud to use this." He did retire 2 years later at the age of 97, being associated with the Duncan as an employee and part owner for 52 years. The three-face pattern has been reproduced by the Metropolitan Museum of Art, which has made the cake plates, cracker jars, and candlesticks. I know that much. I have seen originals displayed at the Corning Glass Steuben Museum in New York State and at the Smithsonian Institute in Washington, D.C. A compote was presented to Mamie Eisenhower while her husband was president. She liked it so much. Now, a compote, this is a compote, but it was they're made larger also. And they were given to Mamie Eisenhower. She liked it so much, she said, "Could I receive another one?" And I guess she did, but I wonder where they are now. Not everyone sees the three-face glass pattern, knows it's my grandmother's face, and I hope that they know it's unique, it's beautiful, and was created by a master craftsman my grandfather.
Stay right there. Stay right there. Stay right there. I'm sure you're going to want to come up and look at these, and I'm going to ask Libby to stay here and guard them. Thank you all, ladies, so much for your stories. They were excellent. We enjoyed them all. And just remember, we need your stories or we can't do this. We will not be doing this in December because of all the other things that are going on, but we're ready for you in January, so let us know. Thank you again. Oh, I can